In 1971, Archie Bunker sat in his chair and started talking. What came out of his mouth sent America into a total meltdown. Even the White House got involved. Secret tapes reveal President Nixon personally tried to get the show banned. Networks had always played it safe, until Norman Lear gambled everything on America's most hated TV character. Today, we reveal how one man's racist rants changed television forever. In early 1967, Norman Lear was flipping through Variety magazine when he came across a short article about a British sitcom called Till Death Us Do Part. It focused on a cranky working-class father, constantly arguing with his left-wing son-in-law. Something about that description struck a chord with Lear. Even though he hadn't watched a single episode, he went ahead and bought the rights. When he finally saw the show, he found it too harsh for American TV, but the core idea still felt powerful. So instead of copying it, he built something new, pulling from his own life. The main character, Archie, wasn't just a fictional creation. He was partly based on Lear's own father, a man who used to yell at his mother to stifle herself, and was once called the laziest white man I ever saw. Those lines eventually became some of the most famous catchphrases on American television. Lear's gamble paid off. The first attempt to bring the show to American TV happened in 1968. It was called Justice for All and was filmed as a pilot for ABC. O'Connor and Gene Stapleton played Archie and Edith, although back then their last name was Justice. Other characters had different names too. Michael Stivich was called Dickie, and Lionel Jefferson was still part of the story. That first pilot centered around a surprise anniversary party that quickly unraveled into an argument about social issues. But ABC wasn't ready for it. The network rejected the show, saying it felt too edgy and that the couple didn't have enough chemistry. Lear didn't give up. He went to CBS and got funding to try again. The second pilot, filmed in 1969, was called Those Were the Days. They kept O'Connor and Stapleton but recast other roles. The storyline was similar, but the tone was a little softer. There were small changes. Edith had more bite, and Archie was given a little more vulnerability. This version introduced the theme song we now know so well, though it didn't yet include the iconic Manhattan skyline. CBS still didn't jump on it right away, but a year later, they changed their mind. They told Lear to rename the show All in the Family and switch the family's name from Justice to Bunker. Lear agreed. That's when everything finally fell into place. There was a moment in 1970 when things could have gone in a very different direction. Norman Lear originally wanted Mickey Rooney to play Archie Bunker, but when Lear described the role, especially the racist lines and harsh opinions, Rooney was stunned. He told Lear that someone might shoot him in the street for making a show like that. Rooney turned it down, saying it was un-American. That decision opened the door for Carol O'Connor, who would make the role legendary. Lear had first noticed O'Connor in a 1966 film where he played a loud, over-the-top Army general. Lear said he knew instantly that O'Connor's face was made for television. When O'Connor auditioned, Lear was blown away and immediately saw him as Archie. O'Connor, however, wasn't so sure. He thought the show would flop and only agreed to sign on if Lear promised to buy him a return ticket to Rome in case it bombed. But instead of failure, O'Connor became a household name, winning 4 Emmys and giving depth to a character that, on paper, seemed completely unlikable. Gene Stapleton was another key piece. Lear had been struggling to cast Edith until he remembered seeing Stapleton on Broadway in Damn Yankees. She wasn't just another actress reading lines. In their first meeting, she picked up on Edith's hidden strength. She knew that even though Edith sounded clueless, she often said things that deflated Archie's ego in just one sentence. Stapleton even came up with Edith's iconic high-pitched voice on her own. That voice became part of TV history. She stayed on for the full run of the show, but left after just a few episodes of the spin-off, not wanting to carry on after her character had run its course. Rob Reiner's path to the show went way back to when he was a kid. His dad, Carl Reiner, was a comedy legend and a close friend of Norman Lear. When they were vacationing together in the early 1950s, Lear saw young Rob cracking jokes while playing jacks and told Carl, "Your kid is really funny." Carl didn't see it at the time, calling him surly. But Lear remembered. Years later, he cast Rob as Meathead, Archie's liberal son-in-law. That bond didn't end with the show. Lear ended up financing Rob's early directing projects, including This Is Spinal Tap. Without Lear, Reiner said, he never would have had a directing career. Sally Struthers had her own surprising journey to the role of Gloria. At the time of her audition, Rob Reiner was already cast, and his then-girlfriend Penny Marshall was also auditioning. Struthers figured she had no shot. Penny and Rob were a couple and would have natural chemistry. Plus, Penny looked more like Jean Stapleton. But Struthers got the part. Years later, she asked Lear if she had been the funniest actress. He told her no. According to her, Lear said she got the role because she had blue eyes and a round face, just like Carol O'Connor. That way, audiences would feel more sympathy for Archie. They'd see that he loved his daughter deeply. Even if viewers hated what Archie said, they'd still connect with him as a father. That casting choice, though blunt, clearly worked. Struthers went on to appear in 157 episodes and won 2 Emmys along the way. However, it all started with a disaster. In 1969, ABC aired a sketch comedy show called Turn On, hoping it would be the next big thing, but within minutes, stations across the country were pulling it off the air. One channel in Cleveland didn't even wait until the end. It yanked the show after the first commercial break and sent a furious message to ABC saying, basically, "Don't ever do that again." Viewers hated it. ABC was flooded with complaints. Just 5 days later, they canceled the show. The whole thing left the network terrified of anything even slightly controversial. So when Norman Lear showed up with a pilot about a loud, bigoted character named Archie Bunker, ABC froze. They didn't want another disaster on their hands. The lead character swore, insulted minorities, and had strong opinions about everything. After what happened with Turn On, ABC wasn't willing to take that kind of risk again. They passed on the show. But CBS saw things differently. They were cleaning house, canceling old-fashioned shows like The Beverly Hillbillies and Green Acres to make room for stories that felt more real. They wanted to appeal to younger people in the cities, not just families watching out on the farm. So when they got the chance, CBS bought the rights to Norman Lear's show, gave it a new name, All in the Family, and got to work on a new version with Carol O'Connor, Jean Stapleton, Rob Reiner, and Sally Struthers. Still, CBS wasn't fully confident. They stuck the show in a late Tuesday night slot, right after Hee Haw, just to test the waters. They only ordered 13 episodes. No one expected much. Then came January 12th, 1971. The very first episode didn't ease viewers in. It hit them hard. Archie Bunker came home from church and immediately started ranting. In just one scene, he listed off a string of slurs that left people stunned. All out of Archie's mouth within minutes. He insulted his wife, mocked his son-in-law, and made it crystal clear that he had no filter. CBS had never aired anything like it. They even ran a disclaimer before the episode warning people that the show was meant to expose how ridiculous prejudice really is, by laughing at it. Behind the scenes, the network was holding its breath. They brought in extra phone operators to handle the expected flood of complaints. But something strange happened. The phones didn't ring like they thought they would. Sure, some people were confused. Some asked if the show was coming back. But there wasn't a wave of anger, just curiosity. America didn't blow up. It leaned in. At first, the ratings were average. The show placed 34th in its first season, but then reruns hit. Word started spreading. People told their friends, "You have to see this." Over the summer, more and more viewers tuned in. CBS noticed. When the new season started, they moved All in the Family to Saturday night at 8 p.m., prime real estate. The gamble paid off. The show exploded. By the end of the 1971-72 season, it was #1 in the country. It didn't just stay there for a while. It owned the top spot for 5 years straight. Nothing like that had ever happened. Week after week, millions of people gathered around their TVs to watch Archie argue with his family, insult everyone in sight, and somehow still reveal deeper truths about America. It was crude, it was raw, and it was real. Back in 1976, the team behind All in the Family had a Christmas episode that almost never saw the light of day. Jay Moriarty, one of the writers, had come up with a script called The Draft Dodger. But somehow, it got shelved. His agent never passed it along and just told him Norman Lear wasn't interested. It was a lie. The episode's real chance came when Jimmy Carter started campaigning for president and mentioned he wanted to pardon Vietnam draft dodgers. Suddenly, the script wasn't just controversial, it was timely. The episode had a setup that was bound to cause waves. Archie Bunker invited his buddy Pinky Peterson over for Christmas dinner. Pinky was a Gold Star father. His son had died in Vietnam. But then, Mike brought a surprise guest, his friend David, a draft dodger who had fled to Canada. The tension was thick. When Archie found out who David was, he lost it. He expected Pinky to be just as furious. But Pinky didn't lash out. Instead, he said something that stunned the room. He told Archie that even though his son had died in the war, he understood David's choice too. He said, "David's alive to share Christmas dinner with us, and if Steve were here, he would want to sit down with him." That moment hit hard. It wasn't just a TV line, it was America's divided heart over Vietnam, all poured into a single dinner table. When CBS finally agreed to air it, the network execs got cold feet. They didn't like some of Archie's language, especially when he got angry about the war. In one outburst, he took the Lord's name in vain, and that was too much for the censors. So, they made Norman Lear overdub the line. What came out instead was awkward and forced. "I ain't talking about that war. I don't want to talk about that rotten dead one no more." Viewers noticed. The audio didn't match, and the emotion felt clipped. It was a perfect example of 1970s TV censorship, trying to clean up something raw, but making it even more obvious. Lear had dealt with this before. He once said network execs would freak out, even if only 50 or 60 people complained. In those days, that was enough to trigger edits. Then something happened that made the episode even more powerful. Just weeks after it aired, Jimmy Carter kept his campaign promise. On his very first full day in office, he signed Proclamation 4483. It gave unconditional pardons to all those who had dodged the Vietnam draft, whether they ran to Canada or simply never signed up. That meant hundreds of thousands of men could now return to the United States without facing charges. But not everyone was happy. Polls showed that only about 20% of Americans supported Carter's move. The country was still torn, just like the characters around Archie's dinner table. What Lear had aired on Christmas Day wasn't just a TV story anymore. It had become part of history. Fast forward to 2019. Norman Lear teamed up with Jimmy Kimmel to recreate classic episodes for a live audience. The special was called Live in Front of a Studio Audience, and it brought All in the Family back to life with big names like Woody Harrelson as Archie and Jamie Foxx as George Jefferson. They used the original scripts, almost word for word, but when one scene included a racial slur, ABC bleeped it out, even though that word had once aired uncut in the 70s. It showed just how much things had changed. Lear had seen it coming. He'd already noticed that reruns on networks like Antenna TV were cutting or bleeping out language that once passed without question. Even in tribute, his work was still too raw for some viewers. Through it all, Norman Lear never backed down. He said it clearly. His goal was always to stir things up. That was the point. Born in 1922, he poured his life into these stories. Archie Bunker, for example, was inspired by his own father, someone who told Lear's mother to stifle herself. Lear didn't just want to provoke. He wanted to reflect what real families were going through. He once told a reporter, "I don't think I consciously thought that anything we were doing was controversial." But it was. He talked about things no one else dared to say on TV: abortion, racism, war, religion. And he didn't flinch. In the early 1970s, American television had never seen anything like All in the Family. One episode after another, it smashed taboos and stirred up the country with its bold humor and raw honesty. Take The Bunkers and the Swingers, for example. It aired in 1972 and instantly caused a stir. Edith Bunker, sweet and naive as ever, answered a personal ad from a couple looking for new friends. She thought it was just about making company, but her daughter Gloria knew better. The ad came from a pair of swingers, people looking to swap partners. Before Gloria could explain it to her mother, the couple showed up early. That couple, Curtis and Ruth Rempley, were played with hilarious charm by Vincent Gardenia and Rue McClanahan. They came bearing expensive gifts, French perfume for Edith and fine cigars for Archie, thinking they were setting the mood. Meanwhile, the Bunkers, clueless as ever, took it all at face value. The guests misread every innocent comment as a flirtatious hint. At one point, Curtis admired Archie's master's chair and called Edith a wildcat in disguise. The tension between innocence and misinterpretation built the kind of slow, awkward comedy that made audiences squirm and laugh. It was classic All in the Family, and fans loved it. Critics did too. The episode still holds a 9.0 rating on IMDb. Every actor in that episode eventually won an Emmy, a rare feat that speaks volumes. Just a year earlier, the show had gone even further with an episode called Judging Books by Covers. It was the first time American sitcom audiences saw a gay character on primetime television. The twist was clever. Archie mocked Mike's friend Roger for being effeminate, assuming he was gay. But later, the big surprise hit. Archie's own drinking buddy, a tough ex-football player named Steve, turned out to be the one who was actually gay. It flipped expectations in a way that was funny but also powerful. Not everyone laughed. President Richard Nixon, of all people, caught that episode while looking for a baseball game on TV. His reaction was caught on the now famous White House tapes. He was furious. He called the episode pro-gay propaganda and wanted it off the air. That moment revealed just how deeply the show was shaking up the culture, even at the very top of government. But that was exactly the point. The show wanted to expose people's assumptions and make them think. Archie's logic in the episode was comically flawed. He said things like, "A guy who wears glasses is a four eyes. A guy who is a fag is a queer." The dialogue was written to reveal how ridiculous bigotry sounded when said out loud. 2 years later, another major moment arrived in the episode Henry's Farewell. That's when viewers finally got to meet George Jefferson, a character who had only been talked about until then. It was a goodbye party for his brother Henry. But things didn't go smoothly. Archie refused to go to the Jeffersons' house, and George refused to come into Archie's. Eventually, they faced off, and sparks flew. It was a scene full of tension, but also humor and truth. For the first time, these two strong-willed men, each full of bias and pride, were forced to deal with each other face to face. Fast forward nearly 50 years to 2019, and that very episode was brought back to life in a special live TV tribute. Woody Harrelson played Archie. Jamie Foxx stepped into George Jefferson's shoes. Norman Lear himself, now in his 90s, introduced the show with Jimmy Kimmel. The recreation was a hit and won several Emmys. Some scenes were changed a little, like the one where Mike wears a prank flower and sprays Archie, which was cut from the live version. But the spirit remained. The fact that the episode still resonated decades later said a lot about the show's lasting power. That power, however, wasn't always used the way its creator hoped. Norman Lear had designed Archie Bunker to be a cautionary figure, a man stuck in the past, whose views were meant to be challenged and corrected by younger, more open-minded characters like Mike and Gloria. But something strange happened. People started liking Archie. Not ironically, but truly. Carol O'Connor played him so well that viewers couldn't help but relate. Some even agreed with him. In fact, by 1972, he had become such a cultural symbol that someone actually cast a vote for Archie Bunker as vice president at the Democratic National Convention. Politicians started talking about winning the Archie Bunker vote. Instead of rejecting his views, many working-class Americans saw themselves in him. This wasn't a new problem. The British show Till Death Us Do Part, which All in the Family was based on, had seen the same thing happen. Its bigoted main character became oddly beloved. And it wasn't just blue-collar viewers. Archie's blunt talk and suspiciousness of change struck a chord with people from all walks of life. As O'Connor himself once said, there were many, many people who thought Archie was 100% right. It became clear that satire doesn't always land the way you want it to. That was the exact fear of author Laura Z. Hobson. In 1971, she published a scathing essay in the New York Times, accusing All in the Family of normalizing bigotry. Hobson wasn't just any critic. She'd written Gentleman's Agreement, the famous novel about anti-Semitism that became a hit film. She argued that making Archie lovable was dangerous. No matter how many jokes surrounded him, people were still laughing with him instead of at him. She believed the show failed to show the real harm behind his views. Her son added another layer, pointing out how the show risked painting bigotry as a working-class problem, ignoring how deep prejudice ran across all social levels. Norman Lear wasn't about to stay silent. A month later, he fired back with his own essay. He asked Hobson a hard question. Hadn't she ever met someone who was both lovable and bigoted? A relative, a friend, maybe even a parent? That was the entire point of Archie. He wasn't a cartoon villain. He was real. His ignorance came from fear, from not understanding a world that was changing too fast for him. Lear believed that by showing that struggle through humor, the show could reach more people. He wanted to hold up a mirror to America, not lecture it. CBS, the network airing the show, was worried too. When All in the Family first hit screens on January 12, 1971, they aired a special warning before every episode. It said the show was meant to poke fun at people's prejudices and hopefully make them look ridiculous. They even hired extra phone operators, expecting floods of angry calls. At first, not many people tuned in. Only 15% of households watched the premiere. But word spread quickly, and before long, it was the top show in the country. Jean Stapleton's decision to leave All in the Family wasn't just about a contract. It was a turning point that caught fans off guard. She didn't storm out or leave in anger, even though headlines made it sound that way. In truth, she loved playing Edith Bunker. She just felt the character had reached her natural end. Stapleton was afraid of getting stuck in that role forever. She didn't want to be known as just Edith. That fear of typecasting was real, and it quietly pulled her away from the show. Even though her appearances had already slowed down by the final season, the idea of saying goodbye still hit hard. When she spoke to Norman Lear, the show's creator, she reminded him that Edith wasn't real. But for Lear, and for millions of viewers, she was. That was the weight of the moment. These weren't just roles anymore. They were part of people's lives. The show itself was changing too. The tight family setting started to fade. Instead of kitchen table arguments and living room laughter, the story moved into Archie's world outside the home. He bought a bar, Kelsey's, and made it his own, even forging Edith's signature to do it. That created new drama, new faces, and a new direction. Harry Snowden quit after clashing with Archie, but came back as his partner. Meanwhile, Gloria and Michael were growing apart. They moved out to raise their son, but the cracks in their marriage started to show. At the same time, Archie and Edith took in a young girl named Stephanie, after her father abandoned her. These new threads pushed the show into more serious territory. One of the most unforgettable moments came when Archie and Mike got trapped in the bar's storeroom overnight. After some drinks and a lot of honesty, Archie opened up about his violent childhood. For the first time, he told Mike he loved him. That scene showed how much the characters had grown and how far the show had come from its early days. When the show finally ended in April 1979, it didn't go out quietly. The last episode, Too Good Edith, was full of emotion. Archie asked Edith to handle the food for his big St. Patrick's Day party at the bar, not knowing she was hiding a serious illness. She didn't want to ruin his night, so she kept it to herself and pushed through the pain. That kind of quiet sacrifice had always defined her. And finally, Archie, usually gruff and guarded, told her how much she meant to him. "I ain't nothing without you," he said. That moment broke hearts. It was raw, real, and the perfect farewell. But CBS didn't want to let go. Even though Norman Lear was ready to close the curtain, the network pushed for more. Carol O'Connor agreed to continue under one condition: the name had to change. That's how Archie Bunker's Place was born. It ran for 4 more seasons, but something had shifted. Edith was gone, and her absence left a hole that couldn't be filled. One episode, Archie Alone, showed just how deep that loss was. Archie stood alone, talking to Edith's empty chair, begging her for one more chance to say he loved her. It was gut-wrenching. Still, the legacy of All in the Family lived on. It sparked a wave of spin-offs: Maude, The Jeffersons, Good Times, Gloria. It wasn't just a show anymore, it was a universe. It changed the way TV handled real-life issues, and even decades later, it found new life. In 2019, a live tribute brought back those stories and reminded everyone just how powerful they were.